As we watch Fiddler on the Roof, it is important to remember that although Tevye and Anatevka did not actually exist, people in places like both certainly did. These self-sufficient little villages, like Anatevka, were called shtetls, and in them people were born, married, buried, often not traveling more than a few miles radius during their entire life. Everything they needed was included within the structure of the shtetl: a teacher to educate their children, a way to earn a living, a place to pray and study. The synagogue was the gathering place where Tevye yearned to sit like a rich man in the most prestigious spot of all, by the eastern wall, closest, of course, to the holy city of Jerusalem. In life there is death, and in Jewish life there is a society of compassionate people who bury the dead, and they're called the Chevra Kadisha. Since the dead can do no favors nor give payment, burial is considered a unique and generous act, since it's done with no expectation of compensation, which makes it a true mitzvah, or good deed. In this landscape of rich and poor, there are those at the top, whom Tevye most admires, the educated and the wealthy, and there are those who live by the efforts of their hard work, Tevye, the dairyman. He can feed and even works out a way to educate his children. His work is respectable and honest, albeit arduous, and affords Tevye and his family a sense of security that is altogether lacking in those with lower status. Although Tevye does not have a job that principally uses his brain, like the doctor, the lawyer, or the rabbi, a fact he bitterly laments, neither does he have unpredictable and grueling work like the haulers and the schleppers whose job it is to carry heavy loads for a living. Finally, in every society, there are those people who, because of ill health or circumstances, simply cannot take care of themselves. But in Jewish society, these unfortunate people are cared for as part of the community's responsibility. In every village and town, there is an established benevolent organization to provide for those who cannot support themselves, especially for widows and children. Beggars are also a permanent fixture of shtetl life, and this classic Jewish joke illustrates the beggar's sense of entitlement. Every week, a rich merchant came to the market and gave 4 kopecks to the beggar. Week after week, 4 kopecks. But one week, the merchant suffered some grave business reversals, and he could only give the beggar 1 kopeck. "What? Why only 1?" the beggar objected. The merchant replied, "I had a bad week." "You had a bad week, so I should suffer?" Economics is an integral part of any society, and in this intermingled shtetl world where Jews and non-Jews coexisted but didn't truly engage each other, there was a heightened sense of vulnerability. Despite the chasms that separated them, there were occasional pockets of loyalties that existed between Jews and non-Jews. Consider the Russian commander who tries to protect Tevye from harm, though he cannot stop the looting of the crowd, or consider the friendship that blossomed into love between Tevye's daughter and the non-Jewish student. However, in most cases, each group remained primarily insular and with itself. With each other, Jews spoke Yiddish, a combination of Hebrew and German, which was generally the language of the street and the language of the home. In business, Jews spoke the prevailing language of the country, Russian or Polish, for example, as both Jews and Gentiles participated in an intermingled economy exchanging skills, goods, services, and money. Hebrew, the language of the sacred texts, was reserved exclusively for prayer. Tevye, however, always speaks to God in the vernacular instead of using the formal language of prayer, since he feels a very personal relationship with his God. The shtetl existed in pre-war Europe and was especially dominant throughout the Polish Republic and the areas of present-day Russia, where Jews were allowed and even encouraged to settle. This area was known as the Pale of Settlement. Following anti-Semitic policies in France and Britain and Jewish expulsion from Spain and Portugal, Jews were essentially forced out of Western Europe with harsh decrees and edicts prohibiting Jewish religious worship and property ownership and limited employment and abrogation of their civil and human rights. So between 1400 and 1700, Jews moved to less developed areas of Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland and Russia, where their skills, entrepreneurship, and education were eagerly welcomed. Even in Fiddler's lowly dairyman, we see Tevye's hopes for a better life for his children and his commitment to educate his daughters. Though difficult, his commitment is quite common in Jewish culture. In the panoply of characters in Tiny Anatevka, we see a cross-strata of society, the emergence of a middle class, signified by Mottl's new arrival, the sewing machine, and the characters of comfortable means like Laser Wolf the Butcher. Though he has money, the butcher does not have a high status or kuva because he does not have a good education, nor is he a generous man given to philanthropy, both of which elevates one's status or respect in the community. This is the meaning of kuva, righteous acts, scholarship, and generosity towards others. We see the seeds of political awareness as Tevye's middle daughter and her idealistic husband leave for Siberia to fight for principles of equality and freedom. They represent the fledgling Bundesparty of Jewish socialists. And among the educated, we see the upper levels of shtetl society, with the very topmost represented by the rabbi and his family. And as Tevye's daughter observes when contemplating a possible partner in marriage, we have only one rabbi, and he has only one son. Tevye at the end moved his family to America when pogroms and anti-Semitism threatened to destroy his family and their way of life. Pogroms, a Russian word meaning attacks and looting and murder by unruly mobs, began to take place with more frequency throughout Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland and Russia. In the 1600s, when the Cossack marauders destroyed many Jewish communities in the Ukraine, such widespread looting and murder was still relatively rare. By Passover 1903, when the Russian Minister of Interior ordered attacks on the Jews of Kishinev, and 1,500 stores were destroyed and 45 Jews were murdered and their bodies mutilated, such attacks were becoming more prevalent. These pogroms and murders were directed against the Jews and were particularly vicious in the small towns and villages. We saw a mild form of the looting, a very mild form in the attack on Tevye's daughter's wedding. These pogroms prompted huge waves of immigration out of Eastern Europe, especially for those with few reasons to keep them there. Tevye was a poor man, with little to keep him in Anatevka. Many others left when Tevye left, but many more Jews stayed behind. Some stayed because of business and property. Some stayed because of family members who could not leave, and some stayed because they had nowhere else to go. Those represented by Tevye were the lucky ones. They left, regardless of how tragic it seemed at the time, they left and began new lives. Following are some photographs of the real people who stayed behind, the people who were not so lucky. They stayed and continued to live their lives. Many years passed, and they continued until Hitler destroyed their way of life and their very existence. These are the photos found at Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland after liberation in 1945. These are the photos the Jews brought with them to remember their most cherished people, their most cherished moments. These are the photos they could not leave behind. The story of Fiddler on the Roof is based upon real historical circumstances, and its characters are prototypes. Those people are not real. These people are.